Mr. President, I want to extend on some remarks that I made on the Senate on June the 6th. The report that I was reporting on June the 6th evaluated audits produced by the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General in fiscal year 2010. I called that report a report card because that's exactly what it was. Each of the 113 unclassified reports published in fiscal year 2010 was reviewed and evaluated and graded in 5 categories. My report was produced by the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General in fiscal year 2010. After each report was graded individually, all the scores for each report in each category were added up and averaged to create a composite score for all 113 reports. Although 15 top quality audits were highlighted in the report, the overall score awarded to the 113 was basically D-. That's low, I know. Maybe the score should have been a little higher. Clearly, none reflected any of the reforms that Inspector General Hedel of DOD put in place in December 2010, as all were published well in advance of that date. My oversight staff read these reports as educated consumers. We expected these reports to provide leverage in the monumental day-to-day Department of Defense oversight task. We want them to provide assurance that the Defense Department is spending taxpayers' money wisely. Some reports did that, but most did not. This report, prepared by this senator from Iowa, is sure of one thing. The audits, which are the subject of my report card, are not somehow exempt from oversight and public scrutiny. In other words, these audits should just not sit on the shelf and collect dust. They need as well to be put under public microscope, especially when they cost almost $1 million apiece to produce. $1 million for an audit report is a heck of a lot of money. So that's exactly what we did in the report card. Put these reports in the public spotlight, and I will keep them there until I see sustained improvement at the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. As the report states, and as I explained in my speech on June the 6th, this grading system was subjective and imperfect. However, as subjective and inexact as it may be, I believe it provided a reasonable and rough measure of audit quality. Following my speech, the Defense Department Inspector General Hedel pounced on my report. He expressed strong opposition to the low score. He complained that it did not adequately reflect $4 2/10 billion in what he called achieved monetary benefits, end of quote, identified in fiscal year 2010 reports. To address IG Hedel's concerns, my staff asked the Audit Department to prepare an information paper that linked the $4 2/10 billion in savings to the audit where those savings were reported. That information was provided to me on June the 20th. I call it a crosswalk. It takes me to the exact page of each report where the savings were discussed. This document lists $4 4/10 billion in identified potential monetary benefits and collections of $4 2/10 billion. After reviewing the crosswalk, I have concluded that Inspector General Hedel had a legitimate gripe about my report card. He is right It should have included a section that addressed potential savings, so I will address those issues right now, focusing on 4 reports that contain almost all of the $4 2/10 billion in savings listed in the collections column. In grading these reports, we did not give sufficient credit for potential savings and inefficiencies. They were casualties of the grading system for one simple reason. If the exact dollar amounts of the alleged fraud and waste were not verified using primary source accounting records, and using primary source accounting records are very important, then they did not pop up on my oversight radar screen. My staff is attempting to work with the audit office to develop a mutually agreed upon set of standards for grading audits. The purpose of these discussions would be to create a grading process that would accurately capture the true quality of all reports, including policy reviews that uncover real savings and efficiencies. From the beginning, I've been very critical of the audit office for producing far too many policy reviews and far too few hardcore contract and payment audits. For the most part, the policy audits have no measurable monetary impact whatsoever. However, I have learned recently that at least a few are important for other reasons. I'm told that some of these reports are of real value in the work of our Armed Services Committee here in the Senate. Contract and payment audits are also very important, and I would say most important. They go right to the heart of the IG's core mission, to root out and deter fraud, waste, and theft. If done right, they too can produce big payoffs. Those audits earn top scores in my report card. I'm not saying that the audit office should do nothing but contract and payment audits. What I am saying is this: the current mix of audits creates a huge imbalance in favor of policy reviews as opposed to monetary reviews. So a better balance needs to be established by the Inspector General's office. That said, I have an admission to make to my colleagues. I finally found a policy audit that I like. This report is entitled Recapitalization and Acquisition of Light Tactical Wheeled Vehicles. That audit report is number 2010-039, dated January 29th, 2010. It identified potential savings of $3.84 billion. That's 90% of the savings uncovered in all the fiscal year 2010 audits. Now, on my report card, I gave this audit a low grade. This audit failed to connect the dots on the money trail and verify dollar amounts using primary source contracts and payment methods. Plus, it took 16 months to complete. When you add the 4 to 6 months of planning that often precede an audit start date, you're probably looking at 2 years to complete the audit, and that's far too long. But this report had other important qualities that were overlooked. It uncovered gross violation of applicable procurement regulations, including the use of sole source contracting arrangements. It also determined that the proposed vehicle might duplicate the capabilities of existing vehicles. In the midst of this audit, for reasons that remain unclear, the project manager decided to stop the program and, quote, put the $3.84 billion in funding to better use in fiscal years 2010 to 2013. This language suggests that all of the money was reallocated within Army accounts for other purposes. Clearly, the audit may have helped to stop $3.84 billion in potential waste. That's excellent, but this does not constitute savings in the classical sense, as all the money was shifted to other Army projects. Waste could have happened in those other projects as well. And it reminds me, while we're here in session in what normally would be a recess, and I'm reporting that the Inspector General found $3.84 billion in potential waste, that now that they're trying to find trillions to cut down on the budget deficit, it might be a time to look at the Defense Department and stop the reprogramming of money. If it's going to be saved, it ought to be saved. And that means that it would cut down on the deficit.
The senator has used 10 minutes.
I would like to continue if there's no objection.
Without objection.
Okay. Using modified grading system to reflect the good quality of this audit, it would have earned a higher score were it not for an excessively long completion time. In this particular case, however, the impact of the audit was apparently felt while the audit was still in progress. So the timeliness rule may not apply here and probably should be set aside. There are 3 other audits containing savings and inefficiencies that I'd like to discuss. The next one is entitled The Implementation of the Predator Sky Warrior Acquisition Decision Memorandum, number 2010-082, dated September the 10th, 2010. The purpose of this audit was to determine whether the Air Force and Army had complied with the Department of Defense directives and law to combine the Predator and Sky Warrior drone program. The Defense Department estimated that $400 million could be saved by merging the 2 programs. While the audit was in progress, the Department of Defense pulled the rug out from under the auditors. A new directive was issued stating that the 2 programs did not have to be combined. To counter this move, the auditors recommended administrative action against those who failed to comply with the original directive. The Department of Defense now concurred and tossed the auditors a bone. Department of Defense wiggled out of harm's way by offering to do meaningless lessons learned exercise. In the end, the auditors caved in, agreeing with the Department of Defense plan was responsive, and backed off. Despite what appeared to be an unsuccessful outcome, the Office of Inspector General still claimed that this audit produced $60 million in savings. The audit itself indicates that the $60 million was in fact, quote, reprogrammed to meet higher priority operations, end quote. That means it was reallocated to other Department of Defense accounts and thus not saved. Since this audit was all about an opportunity to save $400 million and the Department of Defense balked, maybe these so-called savings might be better characterized as lost savings. In my report card, this audit earned low scores mainly because it failed to verify actual costs of 2 drone contracts using primary source accounting records, and it failed to assess the validity of the Department of Defense estimated savings of $400 million. I'm not convinced this audit deserves a higher score, especially since it took 22 and a half months to complete, and the recommendations, though initially tough, were watered down in the end. The last one that I want to report on is entitled The Deferred Maintenance and Carryover of the Army Abrams Tank, number 2010-43, dated March the 2nd, 2010. This report concluded that contrary to the Army's claims, depot maintenance on M1 tanks was not deferred in fiscal year 2008. All planned overhauls were in fact completed, but a large sum of money was left over. The Army requested and received a formal written waiver to carry over $346 million in unneeded and unused fiscal year 2008 M1 maintenance funds for use in 2009 and beyond. The reason given was inadequate capacity at the Lima, Ohio tank plant. Without the waiver, this money would have been canceled and lost. The report concluded that the Army documents contained, quote, unquote, inaccurate, misleading information that may have caused a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. It recommended that the waiver be rescinded and $275 million in fiscal year 2008 money be canceled and reprogrammed or reduced. The Army appeared to agree with the recommendations to disclose the $275 million carryover to Congress, but non-concurred with other recommendations. The report does not point to any real savings. The report probably deserves a higher score except for the timeliness and strength of recommendations. It was untimely, taking 22 months to complete. In addition, there were unresolved issues about the waiver document. Did the official who signed the waiver know that the document would have been alleged contained false and misleading information, and was he questioned about its truthfulness? If so, the report should have been recommended that he be held accountable. To summarize, Mr. President, there are two main problems with these 4 reports on savings and collections. And the fourth one I'm not going to go into now to save time, and I'll put that in the record. None was timely, number one. Number two, reported savings were unverified and elusive. First, these 4 reports took an average of 19 months to complete. 2 took a total of 45 months, or almost 4 years to finish, and that does not include the 4 to 6 months it takes to get an audit rolling. As I've said on other occasions, the power of top quality audit work is greatly weakened by stale information. Second, these 4 reports supposedly produce $4 2/10 billion in collective savings, but all of that money appears to have been shifted to other Department of Defense accounts and spent. To the best of my knowledge, not 1 cent was really saved or redeposited in the taxpayer's bank account. Only in government could you save all the money and still claim savings. What we're really talking about here are lost savings that grew out of waste that was thankfully discovered and avoided, and waste that is avoided surely as monetary benefits. In closing, I'd like to share a simple observation with my colleagues. For some reason, auditors in the Office of Inspector General show a great reluctance to use the word waste, W-A-S-T-E, in their reports. That word rarely, if ever, appears in their audits. At the same time, auditors seem overly eager to tout savings and efficiencies. Now, why would that be? Could it be that their superiors in the Pentagon take a dim view of the word waste? Savings may be nothing more than the flip side of waste. Auditors detect and verify potential waste and then convert it to potential savings by proposing remedies to eliminate the waste. Maybe the auditors need to start calling it what it is, call it waste, W-A-S-T-E, and then talk about savings. I yield the floor.